recorded, and I'll now take this adjournment for this meeting of the Executive Committee held on the 13th of September 2023. I see that we have present Councillors Allison, Anderson, Brown and Carmichael. Also Councillors Chalmers, Clark, Convery, Cooper, Cowan, Devlin and Fagan. I have apologies from Councillor Ferguson-Miller. Councillor McDougall is substituting for Councillor Ferguson-Miller, and I see that she's in attendance at the meeting. We have present Councillors Hamilton, Horsham, Logan, Loudon, Hugh MacDonald, McCallan, McClymont, McCreary. Also Councillors Leslie MacDonald, McGeever, Councillor David McLachlan, Councillor Richard Nelson. I have apologies from Councillor Razak, and Councillor Cowie is substituting, and I see that she's at the meeting. Councillor Robb has intimated her apologies. I have present Councillors Ross, Shearer and Walker, and we have a number of officers present at this morning's meeting, and I'll hand back to you for the business, Chair.
Thank you very much. Before we go any further, I just want to notify the committee that I have received a request for one item of urgent business following the circulation of information yesterday about IJB savings, and I'll come to that under item 9 in the agenda. Can I come now to item 1, which is declarations of interest, and can I ask if there are any declarations of interest? I am not seeing any declarations of interest. There not being any, I will come now to item 2, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. Are there any questions on the minutes of the previous meeting? I'm not seeing any questions on the minutes of the previous meeting, so can we approve those minutes as a correct record?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We're agreed. I'll come now to item 3, which is the Revenue Budget Monitoring Report up to August, and I'll invite Paul Manning to speak to the report. Paul.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So, as you say, this takes the monitoring position on the capital programme up to the 11th of August this year. What the report starts off by giving is an updated level for the capital programme, and it's saying that it's come down by £3.06 million. So there are a number of adjustments in the usual way for this paper, and they're covered in Appendix 1. Now, at the foot of that first page, it says that the main reason for the reduction relates to profiling adjustments carried out, and these in the main relate to projects related to the Glasgow City Region City deal. So 3 projects get picked out in the report: Stuartfield Way, Hairmyres Park and Ride and Lanark Road signalisation. So at the end of the first page and the top of the second page, it gives you an explanation of those movements there, and they are pretty straightforward. There are also some additions to the programme covered in the appendix at the rear of the paper. In terms of how spend is progressing, again, this is covered at section 4.5 on the second page, and you can see that at 4.6 we're saying we're about £500,000 behind where we thought we would be. Now, there is an explanation given there at the end of 4.6. It says it relates mainly to the new Wood Dean Early Learning Centre at Bothwell. However, the point is made at the end of the paragraph that is still scheduled for handover in November this year, and that's as was previously advised, so no movement there. The paper then looks at the housing capital programme, so we're still at the level of programme of £69.5 million, which is what was reported last month, and also there is an update given about the period 5 spend position, so it's slightly behind where we would expect to be, again, just by over £500,000. So in terms of the recommendations, it's looking for approval of the adjustments that are in the appendix and noting of the positions on the general fund and housing programmes. So thanks, Chair.
Okay, so are there any, I was going to come to questions in just a second. Sorry, is this a question? You know, it's in a different order depending on the pack.
Right. Right. I apologise. I've presented the capital monitoring paper, right? So, Chair, do you wish me to present the revenue paper, or will I take questions on the capital one?
Right. Tell you what. Let's deal with the capital paper, and then we'll come to your revenue paper. I believe they appear in different orders depending on the published pack or the pre-agenda pack. Right. Any questions on that paper?
Thanks, Chair. It's regarding the Stuartfield Way, not so much to do with the financing of it, but this is yet another delay and yet another change. Now, when you think back to 2014, when this was first approved, almost 10 years ago, it was all about trying to avoid traffic going through the town and it would go through Stuartfield Way, which was originally going to be fully dualled and a flyover. Now, that is long since gone. We then had a major consultation about what the future was going to be. We've had several changes and delays to that. And I'm just wondering, will there be another major consultation with a final, if we ever get to a final plan for this? Because it's certainly nothing like what it was envisaged in 2014. Thanks.
I'll maybe pass over to David Booth to deal with the substance of that.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Councillor Anderson. The demands of traffic in East Kilbride have changed, and have changed recently as well, post-COVID, in terms of the patterns of use of people with their vehicles. And this is one of the reasons that we're looking at the scheme and continue to look at the scheme. You're right to say there was an extensive public consultation, and that was built into the plans as they stood. We're reviewing that at the moment in terms of what will happen once we've kind of rescoped the project. That will be subject to further community engagement, whether that's through a full consultation exercise or through the statutory sort of planning regulations in terms of the consultation with the community. But we will keep our communities up to date with what the project looks like when it does start.
Okay. Right. Come to Councillor Ross.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. I was a bit confused as well what item we were looking at there, but my question's definitely on the capital programme. If you can go to Appendix 1 on page 20. I brought this up at the leaders' meeting on Monday morning, and that was the use of the Leisure and Culture Transformation Fund. And my question there on Monday morning was, although I've got absolutely nothing against the funding going towards the Tact Hall, I did raise the question that surely we must have a number of other facilities in a very similar position to the Tact Hall. And I wondered if, in fact, these were going to be brought to any committee at any time so that we can discuss exactly how we're using this fund going forward. And I would probably like a wee bit more explanation to the committee in general about how we're going about this. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I'll ask Cleland to pick that up. Cleland.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to Councillor Ross. And it's helpful. I'll share the same response as we discussed at the group leaders meeting. So at the beginning of the year, there was a number of projects, a small number of projects, where we identified property conditions that would require some more urgent intervention. It's taken a wee bit of time to get a paper to Council in relation to Tact Hall, but these works are required so that the property conditions don't deteriorate further, so we would end up with a larger scale repair. This relates to the heating system, etc., relates to a couple of other elements in Tact Hall, and to not address them runs a risk that the property would deteriorate and cost a significantly greater amount. Taking Councillor Ross's broader point, though, that the Council put together the means for a fund to invest in a range of leisure assets, and as we're aware, there's work ongoing just now in terms of a leisure asset review. What we'd want to avoid across the generality of the estate is spending money in properties where there isn't a longer term operational use. And we would bring that programme back in conjunction with the outcome of the asset review so that council would be able to govern and agree the funding. For this particular item, though, this is about putting the money in place for that urgent investment into that one individual facility. Thanks.
Thank you. And can I come now to Lindsay Hamilton?
Thanks, Chair. I was just looking through this and excited to see that that's the funding going through for the Curluck High Mill facility, which is a really exciting project in Curluck, which has been going on for a number of years. But it's now exciting to see that they've got the money to. They've had money previously, but this is a significant amount of over £1 million. It's a local community group, and Eileen and I are very well versed on what they're wanting to do, and it'll be brilliant for the town when it gets up and running. So it's just really exciting to see this investment in the town, and just to say I welcome it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Allison?
Sorry, Chair. Cleland, just going to repeat what I was saying at the leaders' meeting. There are many other facilities that have wind and water issues, if you like. So I think it is important that we actually decide how we're taking these forward, because they are deteriorating as well. And just because they're not in a urban area, they don't seem to be getting taken forward at the moment. And they are deteriorating. So we need to decide quickly whether and what we are going to maintain.
Right, I think the Chief Executive has noted that feedback. If there are no other questions, can I ask that we agree this report, which appears in your paper under item 4? Can I now return to item 3, which is the Revenue Budget Monitoring Report, and can I pass back to Paul?
Okay, thanks, Chair. Right, so this is the Revenue Report, and this takes us to the 11th of August. Now, there are 3 things that get picked out in the covering paper. The first of those is children and families and the spend there. And again, this is a repeat of something that was brought to you in the revenue paper when we covered that last month. So it references the fact that there is a likely underspend against children and families in the current year, but there is one-off funding totalling £9.2 million available in this year. So there is a solution in the current year. The paper then goes on at the foot of the first page and the top of the second page to just briefly cover the work that's being done to look at a permanent solution. So as an example, there is work quoted there that's ongoing with my own resource and with Housing and Technical Resources to try and look at support options for young people moving forward as an attempt to try and address some of this overspend. The second issue that's covered within the paper itself is about adults and older people. And again, this is something that's been covered in the past couple of reports. It's about job evaluation costs. So there's a reference there to the figure of £7 million for year 2023-24. There's a reference to the costs that have been incurred to date. There's also a reference to the fact that these are IJB costs, but because of the relationship between the two organisations, this money gets reported in here as well. And at 4.7, the point is made about officers within the IJB looking to identify recurring funding solutions. So there's a reference there to a recovery plan that will be reported to the IJB on the 19th of September. And the point is made about the criticality of identifying solutions through that route. There's also content at the end of the paper about teacher numbers. So the point is made in there at 4.8 around the arrangement that the Cabinet Secretary has put in place, whereby nationally £45.5 million of funding has been held back in relation to the maintenance of teacher numbers. And this is being held back until after the 2023 census details have been received by the government. So there's a figure there given in terms of this council's share of that money. Now at 4.9, I cover discussions that have taken place between the council and the government since the beginning of the financial year to explain the council's position. And this relates to the fact that in last year's census, the figures reflected an inflated level of teachers and support staff who were in place because of funding invested by the council, not because of government funding initiatives. So the background to that investment by the council is covered at the end of 4.9. That was money which was temporary COVID funding to support learning recovery, and that related to a decision taken by yourselves to put money into education to assist in the recovery of the education service post the pandemic. And it was never intended to be assumed as a core level of staffing against which the council would be measured. So those discussions have taken place via letter on a couple of occasions. The feedback from the government is covered at 4.10, where they've advised that no decision on releasing the funding will be taken until after the census has been finalised. So what I feel obliged to raise with you is a risk in relation to that £2.934 million. The paper then goes on, Chair, to cover the housing revenue account position. And if I can go back to the recommendations of the paper, it looks for noting of an anticipated break-even position on the general fund revenue account at this point, and also on the housing revenue account. So again, happy to take any questions.
Okay, if anyone has any questions, could you indicate now? I'll come first to Lindsay Hamilton.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose I would just like to raise, it's extremely concerning the position with the teacher numbers and the just under £3 million funding that isn't being given, considering that it's been extra money put in for COVID recovery, which has been needed. It's disappointing that the government have took this position, and I understand the education has been speaking with the government about it, but I was just it would just be amiss of me not to raise it. What can you let the committee know when the census is taking place and when it's expected to be reported on, and when we'll know more about this, considering the presentation we got yesterday on how much we're looking to take out of the council's funding already. An extra £3 million is massive, so that would be great if you could let us know, Paul.
Okay, Paul.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Hamilton. In terms of the census, that's taking place now, right? So the details will be fed back to the government. And the dialogue that we've had with the government up to this point is that, as I've said in the paper, they'll provide feedback post the census figures being collated nationally. So that takes us to November, right? But those conversations are conversations that myself and Carol are continuing to try and have with government officials, right, in order to try and bring some clarity to this.
Okay. And I think from my own point of view, I would just add that there is a COSLA dimension to this after the Verity House agreement, and we can't be the only local authority in this position. I'll come now to Richard Nelson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm quite astonished actually at 4.10, the response from the government, and given that the mess that the Scottish Government made of a former census, how sure are we that this will be concluded on a timely manner and we don't end up back here diving about looking for money?
Paul?
Okay, so in terms of the conclusion, this is in their hands, right? So what they've said is, up to this point, they're basically reserving the right to see what the position looks like, and then they'll give feedback to the council after that. On 2 occasions in writing, we have provided a coherent, concise account of how teacher numbers moved and how they were funded, and why we can't see a rationale for counting teachers who are employed with specific money that the council put in for a time-limited basis against the baseline. Right? And we've had acknowledgement of the point that's being made, but we've been told, look, you're not going to get an answer in terms of clarity about the baseline until after we see the census. Now, civil servants are continuing to speak to us on this, right? And we're at the moment trying to get finalised a face-to-face meeting with a relevant civil servant, again, just to make the case to them and make sure that our point is landing with government. So in terms of giving assurance about the answer, I can't do that, but we've done all we can do up to this point, Councillor Nelson.
I have a final question from Margaret Cooper. Margaret.
Where are these additional staff now? Have they all finished the post and the temporary contracts that they had? And are we moving into the new census with any additional staff self-funded that will be counted that could be put us in a similar position next year?
I'll come back to Paul.
Okay, Councillor Cooper, I can't give you an exact response in terms of where all those people are, obviously. What I can pick up with you even offline is just I can give you a piece of work or a piece of analysis that just shows how the numbers have moved, when the additional people were put in and for how long. Now, some of those people will have gone in on a temporary basis and then found permanent jobs. And Carol's establishment moves up and down, usually up, right, because of pupil numbers. So there are a whole number of moving parts in this. And what the government does every year is organises effectively a snapshot to be taken across Scottish local government of where the numbers are. That's just at a point in time, right? And it does start to reflect back on the position we're in and maybe even the wisdom of that as a way of working. It's simply at a point in time, right? And that's, there is a lot of emphasis and a lot of effort on that point in time. Actually, the picture is far more nuanced, right? And it's far more complicated than that. And that's really what we're seeing here.
I just wondered if we would find ourselves in a position with employment law, which is a different aspect to it, but obviously it relates to how long somebody's working with the council, whether the employment law comes into it and having to find people permanent positions.
In terms of employment law issues, this isn't a factor here, right? So, those issues are managed between personnel and education all the time anyway. So it's not so much about that. This is simply an issue of a system being put in place that tries to measure a statistic at a point in 1 year against a point in a year previously. And the difference this year is they're saying, unless you match last year's figure, you run the risk of being financially penalised.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks for that. I think we're done with that. I think from one point, just to bring it to a head, it is another example of where centrally directed policy can be implemented. It might be very well-meaning policy, but when it affects local government, you need to develop that policy with local government, and then you avoid blunders like this. Bluntly, where people who have come to the end of a temporary contract, they are not part of the core teaching establishment, and we are being penalised for essentially honouring the agreements that have previously been put in place and that the policy that was previously put in place under the previous council, and we're actually putting the council at risk. That to me is what it is. It's just a blundering approach to this that the government's got time to step back from. But if they don't step back from it, there is a financial risk to us, and we're a cash-strapped local authority as it is, and there's a risk is set out in that paper. And that's what I would just say to the committee. What is happening here is that Paul is doing his duty as our Section 95 officer and reporting on the financial risk. We hope it's a financial risk that we can avoid and that some common sense prevails. Okay, if there are no other points, can we agree the report?
Agreed.
Right, that brings me now to item 5, which is additional funding from the Scottish Government and other external sources. and I will come back to Paul Manning to speak on this item. Paul.
Okay, so this is additional funding. We've got additional funding totaling £6.331 million. 4.857 of that is revenue and 1.474 is capital. So you can see in the appendices at the rear of the paper the additional revenue funding, and you can see there that the main aspects of that relates to no one left behind retrospective grant claim funding, £3.9 million. There's also local air quality management funding. So that's the revenue funding. On the capital funding, those both relate to Regeneration Capital grant fund monies for Carnwath and, as discussed earlier, the Carluke High Mill community. So that comes in across a 2-year period. And again, happy to take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions on that item? I am not seeing any questions on that item, so can I ask that we agree the report?
Agreed.
And we'll come now to item 6, which is one of the later papers, or the late paper that will have arrived with you this week. And that is on the East Kilbride Town Centre Master Plan. So the paper has been issued separately. I'm going to invite David Booth now to speak to this report. David.
Thank you very much, Chair. The purpose of this report is to update the committee on the work that's been undertaken to prepare a master plan for East Kilbride Town Centre and to seek approval for the master plan as a basis for the strategic approach for investment. In terms of background, East Kilbride Town Centre, as part of Scotland's oldest new town, has always been at the heart of both the town physically and a key point for the community. Over the years, it has served not only as a town centre, but also as a regional shopping centre. However, Section 3 of the report provides background to the evolving retail consumer behaviour. The two most significant changes in that behaviour has been the growth of out-of-town retail and more recently the emergence of online shopping. In this respect, and as described in Section 4 of the report, East Kilbride has suffered more than most, in part due to its sheer scale, given it was for many years the largest enclosed shopping centre in single ownership in Europe. In the last few years, 44 retailers have exited from the centre, and pre-COVID footfall has dropped from 14 million to 8 million per annum. These challenges resulted in the centre being put into administration on the 16th of November 2022. The administrator, Interpath, has appointed a team of specialists to consider the future of the town centre, led by Scoop Asset Management and including 360 Architecture and Savills Property Agents, to undertake a master planning exercise. Over the last 9 months, a period of intense activity has been undertaken on the master plan, predominantly led by Alison Brown and Ian Ross from the Council and Mark Hewitt from Scoop, but supported by a full range of internal council departments and external partners. That master planning exercise is described throughout Section 5 of the report. But focusing on what the outcomes of master plan are in Section 6 of the report, and members might wish to, in Appendix 1, where it shows you the actual strategy, at the front page of that, it shows you a sort of plan of the proposals for East Kilbride, and I'll refer to that as we go through the key interventions. So there are a number of key interventions, and the first of which are Centre West, which is to the left-hand side of that plan on the front page of Appendix 1, and is the most recently developed part of the town centre. However, it has a number of challenges which make it commercially unviable, and these are described in Section 6.1 of the report. The proposal, therefore, is to completely remove Centre West and to create a development site for the town centre residential living. This approach is consistent with that seen across the country in similar challenged centres. The potential to create 300 units of mixed size and tenure, including affordable houses, will allow for a reduction in retail space, create an attractive new neighbourhood for the town, and to support the remaining commercial elements of the centre. Looking at the plan, in the centre of the plan, you see Olympia Mall. This section of the mall, which slopes up from the Plaza Mall to the ice rink has some of the highest levels of vacant rates in the town centre and had so for a number of years. It's proposed that this area be redeveloped to create a new public space around which public services could be situated. And it's proposed that area is opened up to the environments. The exact mix of uses has still to be finalised. However, this could accommodate a civic hub, arts and cultural facilities, and accommodation for other public sector partners. Again, referring back to the diagram at the front of the appendix, to the right-hand side, you will see the Olympia car park. Following Sainsbury leaving their unit at the eastern end of the centre and the closure of the Olympia arcade several years ago, there have been renewed requirements in the market for sites in East Kilbride from some major food store operators. Consequently, the vacant space at the eastern end of the mall, combined with a reconfiguration of the car parking, allows a development site to be created that would allow this requirement to be met. Creating a food store in this location would serve those in the community relying on public transport, given the proximity of the bus station. Scoop Asset Management are in discussion with potential operators, and it is hoped this will lead to a proposal being brought forward in the coming months. Scoop has also received interest from a hotel operator for a 60 to 70 bed hotel, which could be accommodated on the site of the former Olympia Mall, and that's also described in that plan. In terms of adjacent sites, proposals for other adjacent sites have been progressed with third parties in parallel to the master plan, and this includes the former Stewart Hotel site and the post office. Further opportunities may exist for other civic and community uses. The Council is separately considering the future of the Civic Centre, which does not form part of the master planning exercise, and also the future of Lindsay House in the village in respect of its need within the Strategic Housing Investment Plan. In terms of the next steps, as shown in section 7 of the report, the master plan is intended to set the strategic priorities investment for the town centre over a 10-year period. This report is seeking strategic intent for the master plan on a basis to move forward, and separate report will be brought to committee in due course, setting out the details of the delivery structure and the programme of activity that will sit behind the master plan. Section 8 of the report outlines member and community engagement. Following an initial briefing session in East Kilbride elected members, MSPs and MPs at the end of June, further engagement has been undertaken on the 7th of September with MSPs and MP briefing taking place on the 8th and 11th of September. The presentation of the new master plan to the wider community, to tenants, investors and interested in groups is currently taking place in the former Toy Town store in the town centre, started on the 11th of September and it will run till the 29th of September. And that has been supported by council officers, members of the design team, Scoop Asset Management and Savills. There are no employee implications resulting from this report at this stage. In terms of financial implications, the costs in the council in supporting the master plan will be funded through a place-based investment programme, and this was approved at the May 2023 meeting of the Community and Enterprise Resources Committee. Future investment by the council in the town centre is subject to ongoing discussions regarding the delivery structure and financial model, and will be subject to full business case funding available and will be provided through separate committee approvals. The master plan is also intended to support external funding bids, including a potential UK Levelling Up Fund bid. All extension funding opportunities will continue to be explored. In terms of climate change and sustainability, the master plan has sustainability at its forefront, and the projects will be taken forward in line with the council's sustainability objectives. Referring back then to the recommendations in section 2 of the report, it's recommended that the committee note the work undertaken in preparation of the master plan, note that the master plan sets the strategic approach for future of East Kilbride Town Centre and informs the investment and policy position for the council moving forward. The committee agrees that officers are authorised to progress the relevant statutory and legal processes in the context of the master plan as set out in the appendix, and to agree the further reports are provided to relevant committees in due course, setting out the delivery structure, funding model and programme of activity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the report. Before I throw this open to questions, I just want to, from my own point of view, as a councillor with the town centre in my ward, really just sort of commend, I think, the pace at which everything has been moving since the announcement came that the centre was going into administration. I'm really pleased to see that not only is Alison Brown here, but as David mentioned in his report, Mark Hewitt and Ian Ross and all their teams have been really moving at pace on this master plan over the past few months. And we can finally share it with the community and have honest, frank discussions with the community about what the town centre looks like. But having spent some time earlier in the week down at the unit that's been taken, I think they are very positive discussions actually, and the feedback to the programme has been very positive. And I think the other part for me that is important to mention is the kind of that cross-party relief that something's finally happening, but also that cross-party engagement that there's been, not just in the council, but also with the town's MP and our MSPs. With that said, I want to bring in some questions now, and I'll come in the first instance to John Anderson.
Thanks, Chair. I think everybody in East Kilbride will welcome something being done in this town centre. I think they do need to find a solution, and I wish the administrators well and trying to revamp this, particularly if they get a food store. I do have a bit of a question and concern. I'm not too sure, not too keen on the outside space that they're opening up. I think that used to be the way the town centre was, and they discovered that people wouldn't walk from one part to the other because they had to walk outside in the weather. And as we know, East Kilbride can be quite cold, wet, windy and snowy. The other thing that I've got a concern about is the fact that if we're taking away the Centre West car park and putting in 300 to 400 houses, which is another 400 or 500 car parking spaces, which will be private for visitors and the residents. And then if you look at the other end, we're opening up a food store, hopefully. It's 40,000 square feet, roughly about the same size as Blantyre. And if you look at the car parking spaces that's required at Blantyre, again, that will be some sort of controlled or private car parking space for the shoppers going into that shop. And also a hotel at that end. So we're losing more car parking spaces there. And we know eventually that the Civic Centre will need to be demolished and something will need to be built there, possibly houses. And my fear there is we're going to lose the car parking spaces from that side as well. The other concern I have as well, which is the complete opposite of that, is we could be creating gridlock in the streets around about the town centre, because a new town centre hopefully will attract more visitors, which will mean more cars, because the best will in the world, most folk are not going to walk down to a supermarket and walk back up the road. Yes, some will be using public transport, but if you think now the size of East Kilbride, going out to Jackton, going out to Althouse, Lindsayfield, most folk, I think, will still be using cars. So I really hope that the planning, when it comes forward, takes cognizance of the issues that we have round about, or could have round about there. When we talk about clean air, and I know eventually most will be electric cars, maybe by the time this is done, but in the meantime, that could be a big problem for people as well. So particularly gridlock and a lack of car parking spaces. And I just hope that these are taken into consideration. I do wish it well. We do need to find a solution, but it needs to be the right solution for everyone. Because at the end of the day, let's be honest about it, the folk that are designing this, once they've done their job is to get this into a sellable position, then they'll sell it, then they'll walk away. But it's people in here that are going to be left to pick up the pieces if we don't get it right. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to come to David Booth just to respond to that.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Councillor Anderson. I have to say it's the first time that I've heard the weather being bad in East Kilbride. Thanks for passing it on. Just in terms of that one particular point, we feel that by opening up that centre area for the community, what it does is it breaks up the space a bit in terms of, so it just opens up the town centre in a new and different way. And I think that's something that, in terms of a lot of the town centres, that efforts have been made to break up space and to develop a different type of space on it. In terms of your car parking, your points are well made. The car parking has been reviewed and will continue to be reviewed throughout this process. And along with the administrator and Scoop, our own roads department are heavily involved in the discussions at the moment, as are our planning department, and we'll continue to look at that and take account of the car parking and the feedback we get from customers as well. What I would say is that in terms of it would be a false economy to under-provide car parking, because obviously you need to get that right in terms of the number of car parking there, because that will drive people coming into the centre and actually using it. So that is something that is that you've mentioned, and we will take account of. But we've got a number of processes we'll go through to finally determine the actual shape of the car parking over the course of the project. Thanks.
Okay, can I come to Richard Nelson?
Thank you, Chair. Whilst I welcome this report and the East Kilbride Town Centre Master Plan, I would really like to have seen a Larkhall Leisure Centre Master Plan as well. I don't want to be seen doom and gloom, but I just wonder how the funding will come through to see this take place, given that we've been fighting for Larkhall Leisure Centre for a good number of years and I keep being told there's no money. I do wish this well, and I look forward to seeing these funding models coming forward, Chair.
Thank you. I suppose I will say I met just yesterday, actually, with representatives of the Community Council in Larkhall about the leisure centre. That is something the Council and the administration are very keen to take forward. In terms of this report, I would just draw your attention to item 10, which sets out that we can have the plan, but we've got to get the plan funded, and it sets out some of the ways that we may be looking to do that. Can I come to Councillor Brown now?
Thanks very much, Chair. I wanted to join you in paying tribute to the work that had been done on this one by David Booth and Alison Brown and Ian Ross and their teams, because it has happened very quickly and they have actually had a fairly considerable influence on the outcome. I think it's important to recognise that. We don't have all levers in this matter, as we often don't in town centre developments, but I think they've made good use of the levers we do have and of the influence and partnership that the Council is able to lead. I'd like to make one other comment, if I may, that East Kilbride town centre, East Kilbride New Town, has been in many ways over many years quite totemic in South Lanarkshire, and I say that as a Rutherglen councillor. It's quite important to the economy of the whole area. Getting the actual town centre development right for the 21st century is extremely important. And whilst it emerges out of challenges, it does seem to me there's actually quite exciting propositions here, if we can get the thing right, to actually make the future East Kilbride Town Centre work with a different sort of configuration. We're not talking about the same sort of mix or even the same sort of shopping styles exactly, although there are parts of that. There's a social element to this, there's a residential element to that, and a good part of it is actually increasing the footfall of people who actually use the town centre in the first place. So I'd just like to say that I think I look forward with some interest and excitement to this. I think actually could be totemic going forward in the way that East Kilbride has been totemic in the past. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor Brown. Can I come now to Mark McGeever?
Thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, can I echo everything that's been said so far, really? And I do acknowledge Councillor Anderson's making some points that will need to be considered, and I'm confident they will be. I actually just wanted to say that I think the addition or the inclusion of some outdoor public space will be very welcome. I think you're right, the weather in East Kilbride can be atrocious at times, but not everyone enjoys getting into a hot mall and having no visibility or sunlight or no outdoor space and having to endure that as the entirety of your public realm. And I think the move towards inclusion of some outdoor space, if it's done right and it's done with cover, if it's done in a way that buggies and wheelchairs and everything else can be accommodated well, then that could actually enhance the space overall. So I'd like to echo what was said about thanking everyone for the work that's gone into it. And the final point I'd like to make actually is that I hope that when this comes to pass, that we will have much improved public transport so that people from all over South Lanarkshire can more easily access East Kilbride Town Centre. The ward I represent, Hamilton West and Ernock, has historically, well, it is on the back of East Kilbride, frankly, and the number of people who use East Kilbride from Hamilton West and Ernock has certainly decreased over the years. I know that the residents I speak to often say that they've no reason to go there anymore. That's not simply because retail has contracted, it's also because accessibility is an issue. So I would hope that all levels of government will continue to work on public transport and get us to a position where these East Kilbride and indeed the other town centres can really deliver economically for the whole of South Lanarkshire. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to finish with two observations. One of them is about the importance of that civic space. And just to echo what Councillor McGeever said, see the fact that East Kilbride was so retail dominated and that our town centre was a privatised indoor shopping centre for all that time, it denied the people of East Kilbride their own civic space, which I think were lacking in a way that other towns with more traditional town centres, they have that space. East Kilbride, despite its size, does not. So I think that's positive, and I think there are other arguments which if anyone cares to attend the drop-in sessions, you'll hear all about as to why that space is important and why it works. The final point I just want to make is that this is not work that's happening in isolation, and I think it is important to acknowledge that just the other week at the Community and Enterprise Committee, the same architects who were involved in the East Kilbride Master Plan are now taking forward a master plan for Hamilton. It's a more complicated proposition because there are more owners to work with, but it is not the case that this is the only kind of exciting development when it comes to master planning our town centres. Hamilton is also an extremely significant town centre for all of Lanarkshire, and there is an exercise now underway there as well. If there are no other questions, can we agree the report? Agreed. I come now to item 7, which is on parking penalty charge notices. I'm going to ask David Booth to speak to this report as well.
Thank you very much, Chair. This purpose report is to provide an update on revised range of maximum amounts payable with a penalty charge notice or a PCN, and to seek approval to adopt the higher levels that are now permitted to be used. In terms of background, the Council has operated a decriminalised parking enforcement regime since 2005, taking over responsibility of enforcement of waiting and loading restrictions from the police. Demand management measures are a recognised tool to help keep our transportation networks and town centres operating safely, and can also assist in encouraging greater use of active travel and sustainable travel in place of the private car. Point 3.6 of the report outlines the current penalty charge, which is £60 if issued for a contravention. However, if payment is made within 14 days from the date of issue, this is reduced by 50% to £30. And 3.7 of the report explains the appeals process following instance and the processes following instances of non-payment. Section 4 of the report outlines that the Scottish Government undertook a public consultation which considered levels of fines associated with penalty charge notices and published the analysis of these in September 2020. At that time, Scottish ministers did not feel it was appropriate to raise the levels due to the cost of living crisis. However, earlier this year, Scottish ministers issued revised guidance to local authorities in Scotland with a decriminalised parking regime, notifying them of the revised levels of maximums that can be charged for penalty charge notices. And those are contained in the table in section 4.5 of the report, which shows the current level and the proposed lower and maximum level of charges. The Scottish Government has urged local authorities to be aware of the implications of this increase might have on members of the public. However, as town centres seek to recover post-COVID, we must ensure that restrictions are enforced appropriately and effectively, and it's proposed to set the parking charge notice levels at the higher limit as shown in the table of at 4.5. That is detailed in sections 4.8 and 4.9 of the report, which is a £50 charge if payment is received within 14 days of issue, or a full payment of £100 if it is made after 14 days of issue and within 28 days of the PCN being issued. As before, should someone wish to appeal the charge formally, there is a process which they can go through, and that process will remain as currently stands, with charges changing in terms of the new rates. Point 4.10 details other councils across Scotland that have already or are planning to implement the same level of revised charges. There are no employee implications from this report. In terms of financial implications, the total budgeted income for 23-24 associated with parking is £2,460,000. Penalty charge notices, parking charges both on and off street, season tickets and the management of private parking areas all combined to reach that figure. The most recent forecasted shortfall for our income against that targeted figure is £800,000, and this is due to several reasons, including reduced demand across our town centres, and this has been monitored and managed with support from central budgets associated with COVID recovery. It is difficult to definitively predict what a proposed increase in the parking charges amount would likely achieve, but we estimate that the figure could be between £100,000 and £200,000 across a full financial year, which would go some way to bridging that shortfall in income that the service is currently suffering from. In terms of the climate change and other implications are covered, inequality are covered in sections 7, 8 and 9 of the report. And returning to the recommendations in 2.1, the committee has asked the contents of this report be noted and that the revised amounts payable are approved and introduced as practically as possible, moving to the higher rate. Thank you.
Okay, can I ask if anyone has any questions? Can you indicate now? I'll come to Richard Nelson.
Thank you, Chair. David, at 4.10 on page 31, it's quite interesting that none of our neighbouring councils are mentioned in there. So Glasgow, North Lanarkshire are not mentioned in there. It would have been interesting to see what they were actually doing, because you mentioned a lot of other councils in there. And whilst I don't condone illegal parking, for me this is just another attack on motorists again.
David?
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Councillor Nelson. We have asked for what other councils are intending to do, and many councils are in a different sort of stage of the process, depending where they are. We have been advised that Glasgow are proposing to move to the higher rate, and this is included within the 2023-24 budget. But we don't have information on North Lanarkshire. We don't have information in North Lanarkshire, but Glasgow are certainly moving to that higher rate. Thank you.
I could be wrong, but my recollection was that Glasgow were positively agitating for that change, but I maybe not recalling that entirely correctly. Eileen Logan.
Thanks very much, Chair. I think Glasgow's got the strictest regime in parking in the whole of Scotland. You wouldn't need to move, but they would put a ticket. But I don't think it's about the monetary matters does come into it. But if you have, say, like us in our town, a high street, where there's notices saying, please don't come down the high street, that's not the legal jargon, of course, because you're going to cause an accident, and it's pedestrian free, supposedly, from 9 in the morning till 6 at night, or 8 in the morning till 6 at night, and you have an active regime of cars going up and down the high street. And my casework is taken up every single week at least 3-4 complaints about the High Street. In fact, we had a meeting, community council, councillors and various different people to discuss what measures might be put in place. And one driver did say to one of our operatives, well, that's nothing, just give me the £30, I'll just do what I like. So basically, it's not an attack on motorists if motorists are doing what motorists should, i.e. park properly, go to the right places and no cause congestion or fear and alarm if they come flying down a high street when somebody thinks that it's a pedestrian area at that particular time. How many times do we see you can't a whole street blocked because somebody has just indiscriminately parked? So to me, it's not an attack on motorists, although the money does come into it. It is, I would think, hopefully a preventative measure to try and encourage people not to indiscriminately park, not to misbehave, and to try and park where they should. And in my town, it's not the lackey parking, what I call the back car parks. You can always get parked there, but unfortunately, you have to come down some steps, walk through a wee alleyway, and then go to the shops, which a lot of people just think that that's no for them. So they'll just put their cars right up on the pavements and do exactly as they wish. So whilst it's no nice to get things, maybe money put up, but if it helps, then for me it helps.
Okay, could I come to Councillor Brown?
Thanks very much, Chair. Can I very much echo Eileen's comments on that one? Because certainly motorists are also pedestrians and residents, if I may say so. And certainly in my area, the issues that I get coming to my attention are really ones of yellow lines and people blocking corners and obstructions and various things of that kind. And to be quite honest, the examples I've seen of dangerous and obstructive parking in the recent past would really make your hair stand on end. So I really wanted to ask David if there was, apart from the issue of the penalty charge notices, if there's an element which I think the public are interested in of maybe targeting enforcement, looking a bit more closely what we can do to not so much the revenue raising aspect, which is obviously behind this, but particularly to actually try and make people not park on double yellow lines, not obstruct corners, not cause hazard to pedestrians passing and to the general public. I do think actually that's the important aspect of this.
Yeah, in response to that, we obviously have a programme that serves all our communities in terms of enforcement. And if there are particular locations that merit additional enforcement activity, then we can certainly target those locations.
Okay, can I bring in Alec Allison?
Thanks, Chair. I think the points have been raised over the last two questions. Nobody supports poor parking, illegal parking, etc. But I don't believe that many people will be parking there out of choice. A lot of the time it will be because of lack of opportunity to park legally, not providing sufficient parking spaces. And I would have hoped that we could have maybe taken a broader view on what we're doing. Yes, punish those who are breaking the law. No argument with the changes in the charges, but also thinking about providing sufficient parking spaces. We can't all use public transport to get to shopping centres, which we discussed in the previous item. How much of the downturn in these shopping centres and high street centres is due to the lack of people being able to park safely? So I think we need to maybe take a much broader view on how we deal with parking, ensuring that we have sufficient parking in the right places, as well as looking at how we are going to punish those who break the law. And finally, to punish people, you need to catch them. Does this mean that we will be able to afford more people to actually go out and issue the tickets? Or is it simply going to be a paper exercise that is not really going to achieve anything?
Can I, before I bring anyone in, maybe say I think a lot of the issues that have been raised here aren't so much about the penalty, because the point has been made quite reasonably that these PCNs are only issued when we have evidence that somebody has parked inappropriately. If I draw your attention to 4.7 in the paper does acknowledge, particularly after the town centre seeking to recover after COVID, that any restrictions have to be enforced appropriately. And I think a lot of the discussion that we hear today that relates to our caseload is about where there is either not enough enforcement, or in some cases when enforcement has been a bit heavy-handed. And I think we just have to use our local intelligence to deploy the resource that we have as effectively as we can. I know that's an ongoing, an ongoing issue and challenge for our parking service. It seems to me that those kind of issues are quite separate from what the PCN should be. And bear in mind, just like the current PCNs, that some of these maximum amounts you wouldn't hit if you pay early. And the other thing I would just draw the committee's attention to before I take the next question is that rates here have not increased in 22 years. So I don't think that we're asking too much to say that in those particular issues where actually people are parked inappropriately and perhaps more importantly parked unsafely, that we can increase the fine on that minority of motorists who are parked inappropriately. I'm going to bring in David McLaughlin.
Thanks, Chair. I think this proposal is the right proposal. I welcome it. And the point you made about the length of time has been since there's been any increases, I really don't see it as an attack on motorists. There's no attack on anyone here. People who do things wrong get punished for it, and if they're doing something wrong, they should get punished. If they don't want to pay the fine, they shouldn't be parking where they shouldn't be parking. But the question I would like to ask, and it's maybe going to be a difficult one for officers to answer, because at the moment, even with the increased charges, it's not going to make the service pay for itself. It's still funded by the council in a time where we're really struggling with finances. But if it's seen as successful and there's increased revenue created as a result of that, and I think the point was maybe mentioned by Alec, would we see an increase in the parking attendance? Because I've got Hamilton Town Centre in my ward, and I don't get complaints about people paying the fine. I get complaints about people saying, "Where's the parking attendance?" And I've raised it. I see Stuart looking over me there, because I've raised it with Stuart a few times about areas where I see it, but it just seems like every single day it's the same vehicles all the time. And when a parking attendant comes in, the text messages are flying around, and everybody will move in and they're back again. Now, you can't really control that unless you get someone there all the time, and I understand that, but it would be better if we had more attendance, because the town centre at certain locations, it's just disgraceful the way that some people are parking. And if they want to take that risk, then they'll need to pay the penalty, and that's how I see it. So my question is there likely to be an increase in the parking attendance if there's an increase in revenue?
Right, I'll pass over now to just Stuart. Or to David. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks very much, Councillor McLaughlin. There are no proposals at the moment to increase the number of attendants. This is about a balance in terms of expenditure, in terms of how much it costs to run a service, and then the income that's drawn from it. At the moment, that balance is not right, because we're not getting sufficient income in through the parking to cover the overall cost in terms of that expenditure against the income. So it is proposed that if this is accepted by the committee, then hopefully this will add an extra deterrent to motorists to stop them from parking illegally or inappropriately. There are no proposals as matters stand at the moment to increase the number of parking attendants. We do take on board some of the committee's comments about how these attendants are currently deployed, and we'll continue to look at that and target hotspots or areas where we know there's poor behaviour. But it would be wrong at this stage to say that we would be increasing the number of attendants just because we don't have the available budget to do that as matters stand.
Okay, I'm going to take a final question from Mark McGeever.
Thanks, Chair. It's actually just to add a bit of information that's not come up so far. I think it'd be useful. When the rate was set at £60 22 years ago, that had something like half the real terms value that it does today. So given the rate of inflation has increased so much, given the value of money changes over time, the deterrent has almost halved to parking illegally, despite the increased number of cars on the road. So actually, the rate the higher rate that we're proposing to raise it to is in fact really just bringing it back to what the deterrent initially was. I think that's a sensible course of action for the council to take.
Right. I did say that'd be the final question, but I do see Margaret Cooper's hand up, so I'll be generous on this occasion, Margaret.
It's not really a question, it's more an observation. Deterrents are all very well, but they're no use unless they're enforced. And we see that with double yellow lines on streets and things like that just now. And the public are quite well aware of the low number of parking attendants we have and the rota as they go around town. So the word goes out that the attendants are on site in Straven, for example, and everybody's well behaved that day. But for the rest of the time, it's not going to be a deterrent to put the fine up because there's nobody there to enforce it. That was just an observation that I do think we need more attendance to make the whole system work better.
Thank you. I think we've had a fair bit of feedback and enforcement, which I'm sure Community and Enterprise will take on board and reflect on. In relation to the paper itself, can I ask, can we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
We are agreed. Come now to the next item, which is item 8. It's an item for noting on our SPSO annual review, and Michelle Milne is going to speak to this report. Michelle.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. This is a report on council complaints and the SPSO annual overview for 22-23. Section 1 of the report details the purpose of the report, which is on the performance of the council's handling of complaints received during the period 1st of April 22 to 31st of March 23 against the SPSO national indicators. This report also identifies improvement activity as a result of the analysis of complaints and provides customer feedback on complaint handling. You'll see at section 3 it details the background, which you will be familiar with in terms of the council's requirements to monitor and assess complaints handling with a view to continuing to make improvements in the process and ensuring compliance. At section 4, you'll note the corporate management team is provided with quarterly updates, and this annual report is shared with elected members as we're doing today. And there are 4 performance indicators contained within that. Section 5 provides an update on these performance indicators, which are based on the 2011 census data in terms of the population, although we are expecting the 2022 census data towards the end of 2023. I'll not go through all of the data in the report, but I'll highlight some areas. There's some key points to note at 5.1. There was a total of 1,069 complaints received, which is 3.3 for every 1,000 head of population. And when you look at 2022, this was sitting at 3.2 per 1,000 head of population. You'll see the comparison table at 5.2, which shows an increase of 23 complaints from 1,046 to 1,069 from 22 to 23. I would also advise that as well as complaints increasing, there are some that are also a bit more complex in nature, which you'll see referred to in section 5.5 of the report at the bottom of the page, when some require a wee bit more detailed investigation. Positively, at section 5.3, you'll see that 84% of complaints are closed off at stage 1 and 11% have been escalated onto stage 2 and closed off. And within section 5.4, it is confirmed that the council response times are within the recommended timescales within our procedure. At section 5.5, the council's approach to learning from complaints and approach to improvement and maintaining employee awareness is also detailed. And there is an overview at section 5.7 on complaints which are upheld and not upheld, and of the complaints processed. At stage 1, 32% of complaints are upheld, 46% of complaints are not upheld, and at stage 2, 23% of complaints are upheld, with 77% of complaints not upheld. And of the complaints that were escalated from stage 1 to stage 2, 24% of complaints were upheld and 76% of complaints were not upheld. You will also see there is a reference to good practice examples at section 6.1, and these are detailed in Appendix 1. And finally, at section 8, you will see that the SPSO are currently working on a new approach to handling complaints that involve children, and they have enlisted the help of a wide range of parents, advocates and professionals who work in the public sector to support this, which is obviously very welcome. And there will be full consultation before the publication of this and it's finalised. There are no employee financial, climate change or sustainability or environmental implications contained within this report, and I would refer committee back to the recommendation at section 2 of the report to approve the recommendation that complaints performance in the areas highlighted from the improvement be noted.
Thank you. If there are any questions, could you please indicate now? I will come to Richard Nelson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. Just at Appendix 1, I think what would be more beneficial for us as councillors, I think, is a more detailed indicator. It's good that you've lumped them together as in social work, housing, etc. But does your indicators break it down into locality, that we can see the locality rather than just the service itself? And is there a chance of looking at a rural and urban area? Is there a difference between a rural area and urban areas in the complaints? I think a more diverse look at that would be better, to have an overall picture of what we need to agree to.
Sure.
Thank you for that feedback. There are a few areas of the complaints process that we're having a look at, just in terms of general areas of improvement, so we'll certainly take that on board and we can bring back any recommendations around that.
Okay, if there are no questions, can we just agree to note that report? Come now to item 9, which is urgent business. As I said at the outset of the meeting, I've had one indication, one request for urgent business, and can ask Councillor Walker to bring our business.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to move an emergency motion that the Executive Committee instruct the Chief Executive to write to the Scottish Government requesting that they immediately allocate emergency funding packages to local authorities. The reason for this, no one who attended the budget session yesterday and listened to the excellent presentation by Paul could have failed to have left the chambers without being very concerned and with a very heavy heart indeed. I won't repeat everything that Paul did so much more expertly than I could have, but the current situation that was outlined to us is fairly dire. We've had a 9% reduction in the core budget since 2013-14, which has had a devastating impact in terms of local authority finances and impact on services. In relation to the IGB, they are also facing a budget gap, which will be over the next 2 to 3 years, a total gap of 37 million. Also, with the overall local authority budget being a total budget gap of 70 million. Also, the Scottish Government are currently sitting on over £300 million worth of COVID reserves, which they have clawed back from local authorities, 18 million of which was clawed back from South Lanarkshire Council. So that has also added to the financial difficulties that local authorities are currently facing. We have been warning about this for some considerable time now. The Audit Commission are now saying that local authorities are now facing critical pressures in relation to funding difficulties, to the extent that it is impossible to avoid frontline services being impacted by this. Also, it's very difficult in terms of operating within budget situations which now have been described as socially harmful by COSLA when the budget SOS went out earlier this year, and COSLA and cross parties requested additional funding for local authorities of over £1 billion, which would be needed to even break even. However, there's no positive response to this. Many of these warnings, including by Audit Scotland, by the Fraser Allender Institute, by the Audit Commission, have all to date been ignored. So now we are in the position, the dire position, that was outlined by Paul yesterday. There was a paper, IGB paper issued yesterday that's now in the public domain, and it outlines measures which will have a serious impact on the most vulnerable people within South Lanarkshire. It is the people who are currently struggling, who are struggling with the cost of living crises, who are struggling because they're vulnerable in other ways, particularly in relation to older people who are dependent on us for lifeline services through social work, through social care, home care, all of the lifeline services that we provide. We will be in the position where we are now at the water's edge and we're about to go under the water, and we will not be able to provide that level of services to people who depend on us, who quite frankly, elected us to make sure that we do provide these services and that we protect them, that we improve their lives where we can, and that we ensure that their health and well-being needs are represented by us. No one, no elected member, no official, no member of staff, no social worker became involved and worked for or represent people in South Lanarkshire to go down this route. No one wants to do this. We're an elected member, an official, we're part of a local authority because we want to improve people's lives. We want to ensure that their health and wellbeing outcomes are good, that they have a safety net, that they are provided with good levels of public services, which we have been able to do because of clever management of finance and because of the dedication of the staff within South Lanarkshire, who work well up and beyond what would normally be expected of them, and they have, to their credit, managed to protect people to some extent from the financial approach that's been taken by the Scottish Government. I have to say, for the last 12 to 14 years, in relation to how the financial structure that applies to local authorities, all of the ring fence and all of the rest of it. And as Paul said yesterday, when you take into account ring fencing, other departments, are really on the firing line in this next round of budget negotiations. So I would ask for, cross-party support in relation to this. As I say, we have nowhere else to go here. As we were elected to try and make people's lives better, all of us sitting around this table, across all parties, none of us were elected to do what we are going to be forced into doing, whether it's the IGB, the council budget, that we are going to have no alternative to do if we want to legally balance budgets. None of us were elected to do this. This is not what the people that voted for us expected us to do. They expected us, quite rightly, to protect them and to protect their services and provide them with decent public services across the spectrum of education, social work, transport infrastructure, roads, pavements. We were elected to protect and improve these services. So I would therefore ask all parties to support this motion, to instruct the Chief Executive to ask the Scottish Government as urgently as possible to develop an emergency funding packages for local authorities to allow them to protect the public services in their area, and by doing so, keep the residents and population safe and ensure that they can access the life-saving services that they need. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I go on, I will say I've taken the item of urgent business in the back of the IJB paper circulated last night and the information that was circulated last night. And Margaret has spoken very well about the broad challenges as well as just that specific issue. So I just want to clarify, I'm going to bring in Councillor Logan just a second, but if I can just clarify, the committee is instructing the Chief Executive to make an urgent appeal for funding. It's prompted by the IJB situation. So it was just to be clear about that to local government and the IJB. You're nodding, right? Okay. And you also referenced the clawback of COVID reserves, and just for clarity, that was a clawback from the IJB, I think via the health board as opposed to the local authority, but you referenced that as well. Okay, people clear about that? Councillor Logan.
Thanks very much, Chair. I would like to second Councillor Walker, who eloquently and starkly outlined what we will now be facing. And I absolutely agree with what Margaret's had said. There is no one, and I mean no one from any political party, I assume, decided to come into local government to face what we are actually now needing to face. It is not, or it should not be just on party political lines. We should be going forward to ask for the assistance that Margaret has outlined this morning. I don't know about anybody else, but I feel quite distraught about this is the worst that I've known in 43 years. Absolute worst situation. We are going to be hitting every aspect of the communities that we serve, from our younger people right up to our older people services and whatever in between. Every departments and every resource is going to be hit. So there is nothing that, that we will not need to look at in the next few months till we get to, budget time, and in fact, IGB quicker. So I have pleasure in seconding Margaret. I can't say any more than Margaret said, because she said it so absolutely stark and so well. And it is a problem that we're all facing. And I would again ask for cross-party support, that we go forward, as she said, and ask for funding that we so absolutely need, as does every other council in Scotland. Thank you.
Okay, I've got a few more people want to come in now. Councillor Allison.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, we would support that. A letter goes to Minister to request extra funding as well. The reasons have been well laid out in that lengthy motion that was put forward there just now. I'm not going to hold my breath though, because listening to police, fire brigade reports, etc., there are many frontline services that are going to be struggling just now, but that does not mean to say that we do put our own oar in as well. What would always help putting these things forward is showing that everything is being done to make good use of the money we have. I am aware that our own IJB does not have a huge bureaucracy behind it. I think Suman has indicated to me that elsewhere he could have 4 people doing the job that he has. So we realise the work that's being done, but we do need to emphasise that we do need to ensure that every efficiency is being looked at, and I mean efficiency, not cuts, to be able to provide services at the lowest cost. But yes, do support the letter going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thanks very much, Chair. Can I join in the support for the motion too, which was so eloquently, if I may say so, put forward by Councillor Walker. The reality is behind this that local government is overwhelmingly dependent on the Scottish Government for funding. It ought not to be like that, but that is the position. And against that background, it's entirely unsatisfactory that there hasn't, over the past decade or so in particular, been any kind of national deal between central government and local government in terms of the proportion of resource, if you like, that comes to local government. Now, as by local government, I mean local communities and local services. We're not talking about the bureaucracy, we're talking the delivery on the actual ground. We've seen figures on this, of course, which have shown an increase in the Scottish Government's budget over that period of something approaching something in excess of 9% in real terms. But like for like, a reduction in the council element of this of something like 9% as well in real terms. Now, 9% sounds 9%. But in actual fact, it's quite devastating in terms of the things we've had to deal with and the things that increasing demand, particularly on care services going forward. And the only other observation I would make is that we're surrounded by all sorts of commitments about the I think it was called the Butte House Agreement or Verity House Agreement or something, wasn't it? The European Charter on Local Government, which the Scottish Government has signed up to as well. All these sort of things talk about partnership with local government. The reality is that we've had the National Care Service proposal lurking in the background as well, still not finally resolved, but where allegedly there was something in excess of £1 billion of funding dedicated towards that, admittedly over a year or two. Now that money should be released, should be made available in whatever form to supporting frontline care services. The Scottish Government have the flexibility as a resource at its disposal to do this, and it's absolutely urgent, as the figures coming to the IJB suggest, if we're going to support particularly elderly people. You know, elderly people don't have the ability any longer, quite often, maybe to look after themselves, to have new sources of income. You know, they're in a static sort of position as far as that's concerned, and they need the support that the public services can provide. So I think this is probably the most, one of the most important motions that have gone forward from this council. I'm very much happy to support it. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Just before we conclude, I want to, I suppose, make my own point that the IJB faces the long-term challenges, or the very substantial challenges that have been set out in, Audit Scotland have drawn attention to them. They are well known and well rehearsed. We also have this particular budget challenge, an in-year budget challenge here, because of the job evaluation outcome, and that's one of the immediate decisions the IJB will face. The reason I mention that is that I want to come back to that point Margaret Walker made about the clawback of those reserves. Those reserves were intended to support services through COVID. We're in an environment now where there's a new strain of COVID actually emerging, and the health and social care remains under significant pressure, and we're not in the winter yet. Also, that job evaluation, really the driving force behind it was an understanding that the work our key workers were doing was fundamentally changing, and that COVID really changed how we appraise and understand that. So I think it's quite important to highlight that point in any letter that goes to government. Are people quite clear about what that is? As the Chief Exec feels he has a steer. So if nobody is any otherwise minded, can I ask that we agree that item of urgent business? Agreed. We're agreed. Thank you very much, everyone. I'll bring the meeting now to a close. Thank you.